Today we're here to talk about connected modeling in Civil 3D. Specifically, we're going to be dealing with offset alignments and offset profiles today. However, this is a bigger thread in a series about how the dynamic nature of Civil 3D can help us do more work with less headaches. My name is Kyle Groves. I'm an EIT and a technical specialist with ATG USA. And let's go ahead and hop right in. So before we even get into the alignments and the profiles part of it, why is it that we're interested in using independent and dependent objects? Well, fundamentally, it's because they have dynamic relationships with other Civil 3D objects. And Civil 3D objects themselves have a lot of dynamic potential when it comes to labeling and updating certain other pieces of information. It also helps us because when we're using an independent object, maybe a roadway center line or a ditch center line, all we have to do is change the key information, which is that center line, and then the rest of it will update automatically. So today, when we have our center line alignment and our turn and our edges of travel way and our right of way, if for some reason we have to change where this road's going to go, all the rest of those objects are going to follow that geometry for us. Lastly, we will touch on a few or comment on a few nuances of data shortcuts and how they can be used to manage our file size and that dynamic communication across the project. One last thing, today I'm going to use the terminology independent and dependent. There's a bunch of different ways you can think about this, maybe parent and child, or whatever else. I'll try and stick with the independent and dependent, but I may slip in to parent and child as well. So first up, we'll talk about our offset alignments and the horizontal geometry of our project. So an offset alignment is dynamic to the parent alignment. In this case, that will be a center line for a roadway today. But these offset alignments are really great for being modeled as rights of way, as the edges of travel way. And there's certainly as many of these as you can think of why you would want to have geometry be dynamic to that parent object or the deep independent object. But what's really great about this is in Civil 3D, we have the opportunity to use a naming template or a naming formula. And I'll show us that when we get in there, but it's this little kind of layout ruler with a cursor icon on it. But basically what is going to happen if I were to create this alignment that's on my screen here is I've said this is, pardon me, this is going to be a right-of-way alignment. And the name of the offset alignment is just going to take into account what that parent alignment name is, what side it's going to be on, and how far away it is. So when we have our offset alignments, not only do we get the naming formula to go off of there, we've also got some other things. Do we want to follow the parent alignment all the way? Do we just want a certain station range? How far away are we going to be offset? How many on either side? And then, of course, styling and labeling and the rest of that. Some other really great features that offset alignments give us, other than following geometry, is the fact that we can have a widening put in there. This is great for having a turn lane, or if you wanted on-street parking to represent your edge of travel way and have that little bump out. These objects are really great if you're going to use these for targeting in a corridor. And this is the first part in something of a series that myself and my coworkers will be putting together. But yes, these are really great objects to be using as targets for our corridor, which we'll build on in future videos. When we're using offset profiles, we do have a few more things that we need to be aware of. First of all, we have to have a profile that exists for our independent alignment if we want to have an offset profile that is going to maintain that dynamic relationship. And it's very important, I can't stress this enough, you have to create that offset profile when you create the offset alignment. Typically, we just read from top to bottom when we're in those Civil 3D creation dialogues, and we forget, though, that sometimes there's extra tabs that we get to go through in here. So we need to make sure that we go check the Offset Profile tab, check the box that says Create that profile, and then also make sure that that parent profile exists. If you're using a data shortcut, and there are lots of reasons to use data shortcuts for your alignments and profiles, I would suggest that your parent or your independent profile lives in the FG or your corridor drawing. So what this means is if you need to make a change to any of your vertical information, it's a lot easier to do that in the file that's going to be creating that model. Hopefully our horizontal information, our alignments, aren't going to change once we get to the process of actually designing our corridor. If they do, we've got bigger problems. But the alignments can live in their own file that get data shortcutted in. But all the profiles, it's really great if they can exist in that FG or that corridor drawing. But with offset profiles, the really great thing is that we are related to that independent or to that parent profile by a percentage of a slope as we move away from it. So it doesn't matter if we're 10 feet, 20 feet, 40 feet away from that parent profile, the offset profile is going to behave by just going at a default slope away from it. We can set these up by different station ranges, and it's important to know that our offset profiles in this context are not the same as the sample offset that we'll see once we hop into the software, which it's time to do. So here I am in my project, and I can see that I've got a pretty straightforward surface for my existing conditions going along my proposed layout. I do have a surface profile and a layout profile already set up for that centerline alignment. So I should have everything that I need. And now that I have this alignment set up as an actual alignment object, I can go through here and I can manage my fixed, my floating, my free segments, make any of those changes that I need, but we won't have to worry about those for right now. When I'm going to create my offset alignment, I can do so one of two ways. I can go through my alignment contextual ribbon. Also up here is my surface profile and creating profile views, really great stuff. Or if I go onto the Home tab, alignment, down toward the bottom, I have the opportunity to create an offset alignment. If I do it that way, it just wants to confirm that I know which alignment I'm creating based off of, and we can go ahead and get started. So first thing, whether or not you're going to be using corridors, I'm always a fan of being very deliberate with what you're doing inside the software. And that goes all the way back to making sure that you're naming things consistently, and you're naming things in such a way that it's going to be really easy to pick that out in a list of its peers. And this is where the Civil 3D naming template options come in to play really well. I'm just going to go ahead and delete all of those. And when I come in here, I've got this drop down for these different fields. Now, a field is something that the software is going to use to recognize and track that information automatically. I don't need to assign it and type it in by myself. So if I go to the parent alignment name, now whatever this offset I create is going to be named Main Street something else. Well, I do need to put in some spaces or some dashes, which would be referred to as strings instead of fields. But in the offset alignment box, I have a couple of different options. So I'll go ahead and I'll throw in the side. And I will also throw in parentheses with a space, the offset distance. Now, if you do use a next counter, that's really common for those, or for some objects, you can go ahead and define those. I won't be in this case. And now we'll see that that can come into play. Also, I'll just go ahead and type in an OFFS for offset at the beginning there, some dashes. You can have them go not the entire length of your parent, but for a couple of reasons, including maintaining that dynamic relationship from the very, very start to the very, very end, I'd recommend to leave those turned on. Visually, you can always use a mask to cover up those in your plan display if you don't want to see them. But it is important that you can determine multiple rows or no rows of offsets on either your left or your right side, and then your distance away from that would simply be what you're defining down here. So if I'm going to be doing this first round as the ETW, sorry, I keep changing my mind here. But at the edge of the travel way for this particular roadway, I'll go with a 12-foot wide lane before I start my curb, and so on and so forth. Now, when I come over here to my alignment style, this is a pretty straightforward Civil 3D. I do have one in here for offsets, and I also do have alignment labels that I can assign. I'm not a fan of labeling your offset alignments, but for one thing that is important, I will go ahead and start with those turned on. And that's something that's really important, which is that our offset alignment is going to be read as a station value independently all by itself. So when I'm starting off at the 0 station at the beginning of my alignment, I'll come over here and I'll see that as I'm getting close to this curve, my station values are all perfectly lined up at 800. But after I've come out of the curve, I've got less station feet on my inside alignment and more station feet on my outside alignment. When we're talking about these objects, it's important to understand that we have everything that ties back in by itself. So over the course of these 4,000 feet, I lost about 2 feet, or 1 foot on the inside, gained a foot on the outside. If you're doing anything corridor related, if you're trying to superimpose any profiles, basically anytime you're trying to communicate between these different objects, what you want to make sure you understand is that Civil 3D is using the center line alignment as the primary station value. So if I were to be targeting in my corridor or superimposing any profiles and all that, those are all related to the parent object, which in this case is my center line. These offset alignments do have to have stationing associated with them. It's how the tool works, but you do want to keep in mind that you're probably going to be interested in your parent alignment for that. So I'm just taking my labels off by importing a no label set. And now let's go ahead and take a look at my offset profile for these, which did in fact get created. I missed that as a teachable moment. When we create our offset alignments, we do also then have our opportunity to create our offset profiles. So with that, we want to make sure we go into the offset profile tab of our create offset alignments and have to make sure that these are set up ahead of time. So if I go through now and create my right of way alignments, one on each side, we'll go with a 35 or a 70-foot wide, 35 on each. If I don't create these profiles, what is going to happen is I'm not going to have an opportunity to have my my offset profile be created later on. And I'll go ahead and change those to the offset style, or sorry, the right-of-way style, which is just visually a little bit different. If I go ahead and right-click on this and go check out my offset profile properties, I don't have any offset profile to manage. And if I go into my prospector, check under my alignments, the offset do have a fully different category associated with them. And if I go check my left and right, I can see that I do in fact have those profiles created, but my right doesn't. Unfortunately, there's no way for me to go back in and create that offset profile again. So it's really important, if you don't have a primary profile selected, you don't have the opportunity to set that in the first place, always make sure that you go back and you start over. So if, for example, I don't have a layout profile, come in, I go to my offset alignment, I check all these boxes, great, my styles are the way they need to be, my labels are the way they need to be. I can't create a profile because there is no parent profile for this alignment. So this is my stop check to say, wait a minute, I don't have everything I need. If I need to create that profile in this file in the first place, go through and do that now. If it's already created and you need to import it as a data shortcut, cancel out of here, go back, and then do that now. So I'll just back up to the point where I do in fact have my center line profile. And then I do have all of my alignments created. But I will not worry about having that offset profile for my right-of-way, because my right-of-way is typically my begin point for my design, and I need to make sure that I'm tying back into existing. So it's actually not the end of the world that these right-of-way alignments don't have that set up. But especially if I'm going to be using these offset alignments for my edge of travelway, if those are going to be target objects for my corridor, it's really important that those do exist. Speaking of targeting objects for corridors, let's go ahead and talk about one of the other key features of our offset alignments, which is the widening tool. So when I have my offset alignment selected inside the drawing, I can see that my contextual ribbon is a little bit different than my primary alignment is. On here, I do have the ability to go check my add widening box. And let's just say that on the left offset alignment, and left is a negative offset as we increase in the direction of travel, let's just say that I need to make sure I've got a passing lane set up for what is eventually going to be a three-way intersection over here. When I run the add widening command, the first question is, do we want to add the new widening portion as a new alignment? My general answer for this is no, we don't. That's because I like to have as few objects as I need in my drawing, and it's really not that hard to mess with these anyway. So with that, I'm just going to confirm the no, and I'll select my start station. I'll just go ahead and say, I want my widening to be 200 feet behind the intersection and 200 feet in front of the intersection. And then I'll manage the transitions and everything within there. So as I'm hovering over here, I see, this is all, again, tying back into my center line alignment. And I'm at roughly 2146 and a half. I will round that down to 2146. So if I'm going 200 in front, that would be 2346. Sorry, start station would be 1946, 2346. Widening offset. Now this is really important. So it's proffering me a value of 25 right now. So if I just had a 12-foot wide turn lane and I wanted to add in another travel lane for someone to pass, I don't want 25 feet, I want 12. I just need that to be the same. Except my alignment looks exactly the same. What's going on here? Well, I've got my offset target parameters, or my offset alignment parameters dialog box. If I were to just change that to say -24, I would see that now I do in fact have my widening set up correctly. So when it's asking you what you want that widening offset to be, that value that it's telling you about is the offset from your primary alignment to your independent alignment to your dependent alignment. So that value is always there. So what I really wanted to type in initially was 24 feet so that I would have an additional 12 outside. Also, I said I wanted this whole thing to be 200 feet on either side. Yet I see that I've got a grip roughly at station 2446, not at station 2346. So the other thing that's important to realize is that when you define your widening and you do your clicks or your manual entry for those, what you're going to be defining is the full width of your offset. So if I need to come back in here and edit these, what I actually want set up for my start station is 2046 and my end station at 2246. When I do that, I'll see now that I've got a 100-foot full 12 feet wide drive lane coming in and leaving this intersection area. And then I've got another 100 feet going outside of that. Well, that is being managed by my transition. And I can view these independently for my transition going into a widening and my transition leaving a widening. So with these, you have a couple of different options. You can have some fancy curves, or in this case, to keep things simple, I'll just do a linear taper, and maybe we'll cut that down to 50 feet on either side. But lots of different options that you can go through and check that out. If you have multiple alignments where you're trying to define these widenings, you can go through and check those here. If you have multiple widenings along a particular alignment, you can go through and select your widening region by dropdown or with the paging buttons, as well as add a widening through this interface. So it's really important to just make sure that you've got this all set up the way that you want to. And in fact, I'm not quite centered on this one yet either because I changed those other values. So now I want this back to, oh, math is hard today. I'll just use the calculator. 146. And I've got my 100-foot on either side. For graphical editing, we've got our typical diamond sliders, which will manage those independent regions. If I click on that gray circle, I get more grips, which allow me to mess with these additionally. So if I had my fancy curves, that would be how I would manage those. So there's all kinds of ways that you can edit this, tabular or graphical. We're not going to go through every one today, but I wanted to make sure that you saw those. The other thing that we're going to have an opportunity to define is our offset profile parameters. So regardless of how our horizontal behavior is going with our alignments, our profiles are going to be really important. So with these offset profiles, to go back and modify those, I find it easiest to just select your offset alignment. And through the right-click menu, you can find your offset profile properties. Also available in the contextual ribbon. So in here, what you want to do is you want to go hop over to your offset parameters tab, which is going to say, all right, we've got a basic cross slope. My region is starting at station 50 and it's going at -2%. So if you want to define a new region where, say, we need to flatten out a little bit as we come across this widening, we don't want any cargo issues or anything else like that. Let's change that down to -1%. You would go through and you would add a new cross slope region. And I would say, all right, I want station 1946. And that's going to be at -1%. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to say over here at 2296, that's also going to be at -1%. But what I've actually done now is I've said that, all right, cool, between 1946 and 2296, I have my -1%, but I don't have a clean 2% going across the rest of my corridor or the rest of my design situation here. I'm actually transitioning over nearly 2,000 feet of going from a -2% to a -1%. So the other thing you need to pay attention to here is that you are adding a cross slope region on either side of your stuff so that you're defining it well. So if I wanted to transition from that 2% and hold it over maybe, say, 100 feet, this is not a proper super elevation design. This is simply a demonstration today. I put that in at 1846, and that would be at -2. So now, from 0 to 1850, I'm holding that -2% the whole way through. From 1850 to 1950, I've transitioned to -1%, and I'm holding that at 2296, which means that at 2396, I would want to transition that back to 2%, and that's going to hold through to the rest of my corridor. Unfortunately, displaying these offset profiles in profile view can get a little bit tricky since they weren't created at the same time as the layout profile or the surface profile was. We can go check our profile view properties, and under the profiles, we can see that the offsets aren't showing up in here. So you are tempted to go ahead and just run that as a superimposed profile to get it put in there. So if I select my, it can be a little tricky to get them in there because you can't select it. It doesn't live in the drawing. You'd have to first put it in an offset profile view and then put it back in. So we'll just run that real quick. I want my edge travel way left. And now that I can see this, I can superimpose it. And the conditions are a little tight, but we can see that our profile for the offset did use the design profile, sorry, the existing profile for visual clarity here. We can see that as my parent profile has a bit of a dip, my offset profile is really flat in this 200, 250 foot region, showing that transition from a -2% to a -1%. And as we go back away, we can see that we've distanced ourselves from that primary profile at the 2%. So that's great, that's dandy, that's all stuff that we would expect to happen anyway. But what happens when we want to change our primary alignment? Now, obviously, we don't want to change our primary alignment in the context of now our profiles are all designed. That would be a really big PITA for our design. But I'm just going to add in a new PVI over here for demonstration. And once that gets put in there, we'll see that everything just moved for us on our design. I'll go ahead and I'll pick that up again. And I've still got that same widening parameter set up for my transition in, my distance across, all the rest of that stuff. My right-of-way alignments, my edge of travel way alignments have just followed me exactly. Another thing that we can do is instead of making our horizontal alignments change, we can see our design profiles change too. So as I grab, I'll line these up a little bit more. As I take my primary profile and totally change it and put a big trough in where there was a crest, now my offset profile has made that change and dynamically followed it as well. I'll do that one more time over in the middle of our design. And we can see that that's all following and behaving appropriately. So the one thing that these offset profiles aren't, though, is they are not the sample profile. So when you go to create a surface profile, you'll be tempted, you'll say, hey, what surface do I want to go through? There's this box that says sample offsets. These exist and they are profiles, but they're not dynamic. So they're not going to track your profile like the offset will. And so for that reason, I'm not a really big fan of these unless you just want something really quick and really dirty at the beginning prelim stages of your design. So with that, we have gone through and we've talked about our offset alignments. We've talked about our widenings that we can put into those. We've talked about our offset profiles and the cross slopes that can go with those as well. So, and we've also gone through and proven that dynamic behavior. So that completes our demonstration today. And I just want to go back over these takeaways one more time. So when we use Civil 3D objects in our model, it lets us take advantage of dynamic connections. These dynamic connections save us time and frustration. So we saw that our labeling updated automatically for our profiles and our alignments. We saw that our geometry updated for these dependent objects when we updated the independent objects. This is just functionality you can't get with polylines in mtext or mleaders. When you're using an independent alignment and profile, you can create a lot of different dependent objects that are going to be useful to the design. That's your right-of-way, which you can take a sample, you can sample the existing surface, and then you can put that into, say, a corridor target to make sure that you're daylighting within your right-of-way. And you're not going to go be digging up some neighbor's land and get sued by them for it. Offset alignments are really useful when you use widenings for them to model like an on-street parking, a passing lane, or a turn lane. And lastly, our offset profiles could be used to manage our slope transitions. They could even be used to manually design in some super elevation if you wanted to throughout the course of your project. I had to give somebody some training on that earlier this summer.